Hello, my name is Steve Axman, and in this video we are going to be solving the codewars 4KU difficulty problem entitled One Line Task, Squirrel and Tree. And to help you understand how this problem is laid out and how to solve it, I have drawn a little diagram. The basic premise is that there's a squirrel crawling up a tree at a consistent angle, and we are provided the total height of the tree, which is capital H, the circumference of the tree, which is capital S, and the vertical distance that the squirrel travels in one iteration up the tree. And given those three values, we need to calculate the total distance that the squirrel travels up the tree, return it as a number rounded to 4 decimal places. But there's a twist. You may have noticed that the problem is called one line task, which means that we need to write our code on one line, and we are limited to 52 characters or less. So without that twist, this might just be maybe a 6KU difficulty problem, but the fact that it's limited to 52 characters is what makes it so challenging and fun. And if you're new to JavaScript, it's a great way to learn some of the intricacies of the language and really hone in on your skills as a JavaScripter, which is, in my opinion, a great reason to do codewars problems in the first place. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk through how we're going to solve this. So the first thing we need to do is find out how long a squirrel travels during one iteration, which is shown on the diagram as x. And we have a right triangle with a 90-degree angle, and we have the lengths of two of the sides, lowercase h and s. And if you think back to high school geometry, you may remember Pythagorean's theorem, which says that we can take the square, the sum of the squares of the two sides, and then take the square root of that in order to get the length of the hypotenuse, or x. So we can use that here to get the distance traveled in one loop, and then we need to multiply that by the total number of loops, which is simply calculated as uppercase h divided by lowercase h. All right, now let's get started with coding. Okay, so in our first iteration, we're just going to write this out longhand. We're going to use ES5 function declarations. We're going to declare variables, and then once we've solved it that way, we'll go back and do an optimization to make it less than 52 characters. So let's just talk through in pseudocode what we need to do. First, we need to find total distance of one loop. Then we need to find total number of loops. Then we need to find total distance, and then we need to return total distance rounded to 4 decimals. All right, so we'll declare a variable here. Let total distance, and to get the square root here, we can use the math.squareroot method that JavaScript gives us. And this takes a number, so we'll go ahead and do our calculations in here. We could do math.pow here to raise our number, to square our number. We could raise it to the second power to square it, but doing h times h is the same thing as squaring it, and it's less characters. We'll go ahead and do that. H times h plus s times s. And this will give us, going back to the diagram, this will give us the length of x. Now, we want to find the total number of loops, which is simply h divided by h. And now, to find the total distance, We'll call this one total distance of one loop, and this is total distance up the tree, equals total distance of one loop times total loops. All right. And we'll return total distance up tree. And we need to round to 4 decimals, so we can use 2 fixed. And pass in the number that we want rounded to, which is 4. All right, let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. All right, so we're given this example from the problem. Squirrel 8937 should return 42.5869, which we've returned. However, we've returned a string and a number is required, so we can do times 1 and run that, and it returns a number. Great. So let's go ahead and run this in codewars and see what we get. All right, so there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that we've passed 110 of the test cases. The bad news is that we failed the test that says it needs to be less than 52 characters, which is what we were expecting. So now we need to go back and optimize it to be less than 52 characters. So let's talk through how we might do that. The first thing we already mentioned, we need to convert our ES5 function to ES6 arrow function. And we need to ensure implicit return is enabled, and we'll talk through that. If you look at our code, this math.squareroot calculation takes up 22 characters, and given that we only have 51 characters to work with, we probably need to shorten that up, so we'll find a better way, or I should say shorter way, to do square root. And then we need to remove variable declarations, and we need to remove parens and spaces that aren't needed. All right, so we'll go through these steps to do an optimization and make it shorter. So I'll go ahead and comment out our old code, and we'll write it shorter. Squirrel equals. So we can do H, and S without spaces because JavaScript is really chill. We'll do an arrow function. And your instinct here might be to open up brackets because we're writing a function, but 2 reasons we don't want to use them. First is that that characters are at a premium and we don't want to use them if we don't have to. And with arrow functions, you don't need to open up brackets. And then also, when you don't use brackets, we get what's called implicit return, meaning we don't have to explicitly write the word return. It'll return for us without us telling it to do so, and that'll save us 7 characters. So we'll get rid of the bracket. And as I said before, the next thing we need to do is find a shorter way to do math.squareroot. So you probably have no idea how to do this with JavaScript, or if there's a way to do it. So a good way, or a good place to start, is open up the DevTools and inspect the element. We'll do a deep inspection on the JavaScript math element. And we are trying to find the hypotenuse of a right triangle. So scrolling through, we see this method called hypot, which is rather promising. So if we look at the docs for that, it says that math.hypot returns the square root of the sum of squares of its arguments, which is exactly what we're looking for. So let's use that. Here's the DevTools. Right. And we can pass in H and S, and it's going to square them for us, and it's going to sum them for us. So it's giving us the square root in much less characters, which is great for this problem. All right, and now we want to, now that we have the distance traveled in one iteration, we need to multiply it by the total number of iterations up the tree, which is h divided by h. And your instinct might be to use parentheses here, and it's probably best practice to use parentheses here just because it's cleaner and easier to read, but because we're trying to save characters, we actually don't need the parentheses here because of the order of operations that JavaScript performs. It's going to do the math.hypot calculation first, and then the h divided by h calculation, and then it's going to do the multiplication. Okay, and now we want to round the 4 decimal places, so we'll do 2 fixed and pass in 4. But if we write it like this, it's going to run the decimal place calculation on the h divided by h, so we actually need to wrap this whole thing in parentheses. And let's see what this gives us. All right, same thing. 42.5869 returned as a string, so we'll do times 1 and convert it to a number. However, we're at 52 characters, and our solution needs to be less than 52 characters. So there's actually a shorter way, which we just wrote it in 2 characters to convert it to a number, but you can actually just do a plus sign at the beginning, which also converts a string into a number. And we'll run this to make sure it works, and it does. And now we'll paste this code into codewars. And it's all on one line, and it's less than 52 characters. Go ahead and run it. And voila! We've passed all the test cases, including being under our 52 character limit. Thanks so much for watching the video, and have a great rest of your day.